He's been gone for 20 years, and he can't remember his own name. I mean, just imagine that for a second. Waking up stranded on a beach, totally isolated, completely lost, with absolutely zero memory of your past, the family you left behind, or even the wars you fought. That is the exact hook of the incredible story we're going to be breaking down today. Right out of the gate, we're looking at this still, dark ocean at night. Christopher Nolan has taken a 2,700-year-old epic and completely stripped away all that gleaming bronze and those sunny Mediterranean myths we're so used to seeing. Instead, he hits us with this incredibly desaturated, moody, and just brilliantly cinematic tone from the very first frame.
So let's dive right in. Welcome to this explainer on Nolan's The Odyssey, a deconstructed myth. We are going to unpack Christopher Nolan's massive 172-minute IMAX masterpiece. And what is so fascinating here is exactly how he takes a foundational story of Western literature and just brilliantly fractures the narrative, turning the whole thing into this deep psychological puzzle. Let's look at how he builds this beautifully fractured world.
All right, part one. A war already over. You know how most adaptations of the Trojan War start off with these giant armies and the dramatic fall of a city? Well, Nolan totally bypasses that. He skips the ending everyone expects and drops us straight into a cold political stalemate back home in Ithaca. And just look at the visual separation of these timelines. We've got Ithaca in the present day, bathed in this really stark, cold blue. This is where Penelope is besieged by unwanted suitors in what feels like a tense, slow-burning political thriller. But then in stark contrast, Odysseus's fragmented memories show up in this warm amber. It's this incredibly chilling reality of a home under siege, right up against a burning past that is just desperately trying to claw its way back to the surface.
Now, to keep this super heavy lore grounded without totally overwhelming us, we have an absolutely stacked ensemble cast taking on these mythic roles. You've got Matt Damon anchoring the whole film as the lost king Odysseus. Anne Hathaway is playing Penelope, the besieged queen trying to hold the fort. Robert Pattinson brings this really unsettling mix of charm and menace to Antinous, the lead suitor. And then there's Zendaya, who operates from the margins as Athena, the protector. Nolan is basically using these massive talents to take mythic archetypes and turn them into very real, very dangerous human characters.
Moving on to part two, the Lotus and Memory.
So, when we actually first meet Odysseus, he is not off fighting a monster. He's a captive on Calypso's island. And Calypso, played by Charlize Theron, is feeding him a diet centered entirely around this pale, crushed lotus flower. Now, in the original Homeric myth, the lotus eaters are kind of just a brief pit stop, right? But here, Nolan makes it the absolute amnesia engine that drives the entire structure of the film. It's not just some drug. It is literally a weapon of erasure.
This lotus is a mechanism that violently strips away identity. It actually forces the narrative to unfold as memories clawing their way back into a man's mind. So think about this. Every single monster, god, and disaster we are about to see isn't happening in real time. They are actually recovered memories from a man who completely forgot his own war. It really is like a giant puzzle.
And the way those memories come back is wild. They start out completely abstract. You see this strange, half-buried wooden shape, and it's super confusing at first, right? Until it suddenly snaps into the horrifying reality of the breached Trojan horse, surrounded by firelight and total chaos. This sequence is also super interesting because it reveals Nolan's willingness to step outside of pure Homeric lore. He brings in Sinon, played by Elliot Page, waiting in the dark inside the horse, and that's actually a character borrowed from much later Roman texts. It just goes to show Nolan is really crafting his own ultimate version of this mythology.
Which brings us to part three, grounded monsters and horror. When the memories do finally return, they are absolutely terrifying. But rather than relying on digital magic or CGI fests, Nolan takes a brutally practical, psychological approach to these mythical beasts. Step 1, we have the Cyclops' cave. Step 2, Circe's illusion. And Step 3, Scala et Charybdis. This traces a really rapid, brutal progression. Odysseus' desperate crew isn't going on some fun, swashbuckling adventure here. They are dying off, one by one, in what is essentially a relentless survival horror.
Let's look at that very first encounter. Bill Irwin plays Polyphemus, the Cyclops, and the creature's built mostly with practical effects. Real sets, real shadows. It looks incredible. But here is the classic Nolan twist. The giant is actually framed sympathetically. He's really just an enormous shepherd whose home gets invaded by a bunch of desperate thieves. So, when Odysseus maligns him, it doesn't feel like a triumphant hero moment at all. It's this brutal, violent act that directly incurs the wrath of Poseidon and ultimately costs him 10 years of his life. And the horror just escalates from there. Critics are literally calling the Cersei sequence, quote, the single scariest sequence Nolan has ever directed. With Samantha Morton playing Cersei, the film just leans entirely into pure psychological terror. Instead of showing us some cartoonish, literal transformation of men turning into pigs, Nolan deliberately blurs and obscures the whole process. He forces your imagination to do the heavy lifting, which honestly makes the loss of their humanity infinitely more disturbing.
Part 4. Silence and the Underworld. As Odysseus is desperately searching for a way home, he goes to the land of the dead, and Nolan uses some extreme visual techniques to convey this total sensory deprivation. While the living world is full of all that vibrant color we talked about, Nolan strips the color grade away entirely for the underworld. He presents it in pure black and white, giving it this almost art house monochrome aesthetic. This is where we meet James Remar's blind prophet, Tiresias. The total lack of color instantly isolates you as a viewer, making you truly feel the absolute emptiness of death.
But it's not just the isolating visuals. He also plays with sound. Or actually, the absolute lack of it. Total silence. During the legendary encounter with the sirens, Nolan literally drops the audio completely. We just see wax being frantically pressed into a crewman's ear. We never once hear the beautiful, deadly song of the sirens. Instead, the horror is conveyed entirely through Matt Damon's screaming, straining face as he's tied to the mast. By keeping the film completely silent here, Nolan forces us, the audience, to imagine just how maddening that song must be for ourselves. And you know what? It makes it far more powerful than any musical score ever could be.
And finally, Part 5, The Cost of Homecoming. So all these fragmented, recovered memories eventually catch up to the present timeline, violently colliding with that cold blue reality of Ithaca we saw at the very beginning. But right before he reaches those shores, we witness the final, lightning-fast loss of his crew. We see this lone ship gliding past jagged, smoking rock formations. This represents the brutal gauntlet of the multi-headed Scylla and that disastrous, mutinous slaughter of Apollo's sacred cattle. It's the final tipping point, the moment that leaves Odysseus completely, utterly alone.
Which leaves us staring at one absolutely staggering number. 20. 20 long years. That is the massive gap between Odysseus leaving for Troy and finally stepping foot back on his own shores. I mean, put that into perspective. He is returning to a wife who barely recognizes him and a son, Telemachus, who he literally does not know. The emotional weight of all that lost time is just staggering. So what actually happens when he gets there? Well, he arrives disguised, he's uncertain, and he is vastly outnumbered. We see Zendaya's Athena quietly steering events from the margins, just nudging the pieces into place. And when the climax finally hits against the suitors, it is not some glorious, clean, heroic fight. It is grounded, practical, desperate violence. The film really forces us to confront the massive psychological cost of survival. What we're watching is a small, desperate family slaughtering a room full of comfortable, arrogant men who have had 20 years to settle into someone else's home. Which leaves us with a final, lingering question. Is this a hero's triumphant return? Or is it a terrifying look at what men become when there is absolutely no one left to hold them accountable? This explainer definitely doesn't hand you an easy answer, but it fundamentally changes how we view the consequences of survival and violence in this classic tale. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really hope this leaves you wanting to explore the deeper layers of the stories we all think we already know.